first one's called Borrow, Quote, Steal, Trade, How Things Really Get Created. Sometimes the best we can do is quote the smart, funny, insightful people we know. From Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist, I learned that Harold Ramis once laid out his rule for success. Find the most talented person in the room, and if it's not you, go stand next to him or her. I added the her. Try to be helpful. One of the people Ramis stood next to was Bill Murray. That worked out pretty well for both of them. Musicians quote other musicians all the time, sometimes calling those interpretations variations on a theme. Bob Dylan used melodies from traditional music in certain of his songs, the way Aaron Copland, before him, and other classical composers often quoted folk music from their compositions. Over the summer, I got to hear Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush perform. Throughout the show, they made both subtle and blatant references to other musicians' songs. Douglas inserted a lick from an Allman Brothers song into one of his numbers. Later, he introduced the emphysema two-step. This is a tune I ripped off a Cajun accordion player a long time ago. Alluding to another artist's work can be a way of paying tribute to someone you admire and at the same time feeding a crumb to a knowledgeable reader who gets the reference. I once referenced this line of Mary Oliver's poem, Wild Geese. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles. I wrote, I didn't walk for 100 miles on my knees. Those who recognized the reference tapped into the power of Oliver's poem. Those who didn't perhaps still appreciated the beauty of the imagery in my essay about making a pilgrimage. Our creativity, in other words, is fluid and relies heavily on those who came before. Sometimes the influence impels us to discard the ideas and accomplishments of our forebears, but we're all swayed in some way by what we witness, read, or experience. It's Pandora's box. You can't unexperience or unsee what you've seen, and as a result, can't help but be impacted by it. This process is an inevitable part of how we learn, how we develop our own style, and how we decide who and what we'll be. One of our favorite phrases at our house has always been, sure, we'll take it. We have a number of possessions in our house that have always been passed along to us at various stages of our married life. The pressed-back oaked dining room chairs that I grew up with, my mother's wedding dishes, fondly known as cosmic ware, and highly coveted by my younger relatives for their mid-century modern motifs, and a buffet that belonged to my grandmother's second best friend, who gave it to my Aunt Nina, who painted it black and then gave it to us. I'm deeply attached to all of these items and have integrated them into our household as cherished relics. Not one of us does anything on our own, in other words. We all have ancestors, mentors, cohorts, co-conspirators, and relatives who've come before us, who watch out for us, sometimes get in our way, and sometimes pave the way for us to do our own work. Anyone who claims the title self-made is lying. There's really no such thing. Even if you only copy others' work, if you do it long enough, your personalities and skills will impose themselves on the work. There's no way around it. Our egos won't allow us to subvert ourselves that deeply. As I work in my studio, the layering of imagery, memory, my own unique aesthetic sensibilities, study of art history, combined with my own life experiences, make my artwork intensely personal and impossible for anyone else to reproduce, even if they tried. Thank you. So I wrote this one almost a year ago for Flag Live. So you may have read it, but this is a slightly different version. It's called Trail Religion, Hiking with the Order of the Pearly Everlasting. The solstice is nearly here, and I'm trying to remember to lean into it, instead of cowering under the covers or next to the fireplace for the next 3 months. Time to brave the rocky path of winter. The mild fall allowed Roberta, Wendy, and me to go backpacking a few weeks ago in the Superstition Mountains. Most times our procession went in exactly that order. I like being last. I battle my thoughts on rough trails as I consider what small but multitudinous obstacles bar the way to my destination versus my skills to overcome them. When faced with such things, I don't usually cry, but I'll admit having had the impulse to weep and wail, or like a tired toddler, plop down and refuse to go any further. To keep our minds engaged on the trail, we made up names for religions we feel we're a part of. Church of the Latter-day Basalt, Sisters of the Order of the Pearly Everlasting. Pearly Everlasting is the common name for Anaphalius margaritaceae, a plant Wendy showed us along the trail, and the whimsical name enchanted me. Wendy's a senior botanist and the curator of the herbarium at the Desert Botanical Gardens in Phoenix. She says she's a jojoba witness. Going back many years, I've had a number of friends who are professional or amateur botanists. Every time I go into the field with them, I learn a new plant or two. These women are smart and tough, with plant presses made from cardboard and newspaper strapped to the outside of their already fully laden backpacks, having collected specimens along the trail or in the bush near the trail. Their arms and legs get scratched from barreling through brush or doing battle with prickly pear cactus, agave, or crown of thorn plants. It's not unusual to see them down on their hands and knees, butts in the air, inspecting some tiny green thing. From them, I learn what plants smell amazing, what gear is essential, and what to leave behind so you can carry the extra bundle of collected plants. Or just how to suck it up and survive. One January, 3 of them spent an unexpected and unequipped night huddling next to the Spencer Trail above Lee's Ferry, having hiked too long to come down the perilous trail in the daylight hours. On this latest trip, I used Mike's hiking stick and paced myself up and down the hills, feeling grateful for living at 7,000 feet and hiking lower. And then I had one tiny little misstep, twisting my knee just a little bit wrong. It wasn't catastrophic, but it slowed me down even more than usual, and I breathed a little easier when the lake where our car was parked came into view on the last day. I make good use of my knees, so it's no wonder they hurt sometimes. Walking is my religion. Instead of getting down on my knees, I march around in the woods, up and down hills and along ridges. Now I'm in rehab mode and have been walking around Buffalo Park most days. That trail is wider and smoother, allowing me to look up while I walk, to think about things other than where to put my feet. I notice the water that collects in the basin of the boulder next to the path, and the shape of the fog bank that clogs the sky to the east. I attend to whether the clouds are building or dissipating. Depending on which way it's blowing, the wind carries the clear, clean scent of an incoming storm or the reek of dog food cooking at the Purina plant. When I walk alone, I listen closely to music and catch lyrics I rarely notice otherwise. I get ecstatic about the way the late afternoon light silhouettes the stems of dried grasses, lighting them up like something sacred. The whole place feels like an altar. A wide trail isn't better than a rocky one, just as winter isn't inherently better than summer. Walking that clear path, it's easy to be confident, but there are great benefits to be gained by walking through rubble on the path less traveled, and to greeting winter with a joyous and open heart. Adopt a braver perspective, see unusual sights, learn your limits, do battle with your inner demons, and make up new religions. So this one's a little tough in light of the terror attacks on the clinic in Colorado Springs over the weekend or last week, I decided to reread a column that I wrote for Flag Live in 2012. How many of you have seen the Kevlar kimono, if any of you? No? Okay. I did a piece of artwork, but before I made it, I actually wrote this column and then realized that I had to make the piece of artwork. So during the 2012 election season, as the rhetoric about birth control and rape and abortion became increasingly ignorant and hostile towards women, like Todd Aiken's legitimate rape comments, I felt I had to speak out. I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I wrote about my own reproductive experiences in an essay that was published in Flagstaff Live. I have two sisters. Between the three of us, we've had a range of reproductive experiences: miscarriages, near misses with miscarriages, false positives, and the birth of live, healthy babies. During her second pregnancy, one sister was told that her child would likely be born with Down syndrome. In spite of that possibility, there was never any question about whether she would continue the pregnancy, but further tests reversed the diagnosis. And one other thing, I had an abortion. I was a sexually active contraceptive using college student in 1978. I planned to finish college and go on to study law. I wasn't even sure I wanted children at all, but there I was, pregnant. I was more stunned than anything at that point, shocked to find myself in that situation. Being a parent was not in my life plan, let alone becoming a single mother. This was the vision that kept me in college when things got tough. I pictured myself working as a checker in a grocery store. I know now there are lots worse things than that, but I lacked the imagination to think of anything worse. It was 5 years after Roe v. Wade. Abortion was legal, but still not easy to arrange. A girlfriend drove me to a clinic an hour away. The procedure was painful, and it seemed to me deliberately engineered to humiliate. A couple of days passed before I felt like facing the world again. I hid out in my dorm room, sleeping and skipping classes, but still studying. The specter of the menial job did not depart my nightmares for many years. And still, I had no regrets over my decision, either then or in the years since. I wish I didn't feel compelled to tell that story. It's not really anyone else's decision or business, but there are people who feel certain that they can make that very personal decision for every single female human of childbearing age in this country. How many of the people who support a complete ban on abortion are men for whom there is not one remotely equivalent experience? Here's my theory. Our reproductive capacity and habits evolved many thousands of years ago to overcome high infant mortality and short life expectancy in the days when many hands helped ensure survival. Blessedly, we've progressed to the point where we're no longer reliant on high birth rate to combat extinction. Quite the opposite, in fact. But evolution hasn't caught up with our medical capabilities. We can reproduce more effectively than is good for us or the planet. When I was 23, I met my husband, Michael, and almost immediately changed my mind about having children. Our oldest son, Keenan, was born in Iowa in 1985, the first grandchild on either side of the family. We moved to Flagstaff the following year. 4 years later, we had David. Their childhoods were not idyllic exactly, but they were pretty good. Both boys grew into fine, kind, intelligent men, so much like their father. My life would have been so very different if I'd gone through with that first pregnancy. And though the procedure was legal, I knew I'd still have been judged for having gone through with it. So I've kept it quiet for the most part over the years. I wasn't ashamed, just protective of the information. It's been a hard story to tell, but it was important to me to relate my experiences in light of recent political talk about such things. In the days when radical pro-lifers, terrorists, were bombing clinics, and they still are, and murdering doctors, I bought 2 yards of bulletproof Kevlar fabric to embed into a kimono. I envisioned a metaphorical, physically safe garment in which a woman could make a decision that was hers alone, without any outside pressure or threat. That Kevlar is wrapped up in my studio, waiting for the right moment. The kimono project is still in the conceptual phase, but I think it's time to get it made. So I finished the Kevlar kimono in the spring of 2013. It turned out to be more of a public art project than a statement about my own experiences, because as I collected images for that piece, I heard stories from both women and men about their experiences. And in that way, it became part of the work. You can see photos and learn more about the Kevlar Kimono Project at kevlarkimonoproject.com. And I'm now working on a new related project. So this last little essay is it's a little bit of fluff, but yeah, I think you'll appreciate it. I wrote it in March of 2011. After the Viola Awards a few weeks ago, a bunch of us traipsed over to Uptown Billiards in search of closure and whiskey. Poet and owner of Uptown, James J., had just won the Viola Award for literature. Upon receiving the award, he stood and recited someone else's poem, bringing some of us to tears. Some of the acceptance speeches that night were eloquent, but James' poise, elegant delivery topped them all. He showed up at the bar just after we arrived. First thing, he started clearing tables and filling orders, wearing the rolled up sleeves of his tuxedo shirt. Kudos aside, there was work to be done. This is the way to be, I thought. Chop wood, carry water, after enlightenment, the laundry. There are a million ways to say it, but the truth is the daily work of making a life keeps us grounded in this world. Humble work keeps us humble, especially for those of us who spend much of our time doing creative work. This other kind of transitory, practical work matters. The uneven ebb and flow of time and creative undertakings can run away with us, leaving us breathless and tethered to the earth by only the barest thread, like human kites. I used to think that only open-ended studio time would allow me the luxury of deep conversation with my materials. While at times the leap from creative inspiration to exhalation does seem to be hugely dependent on freedom, other times the structure of a deadline, arbitrary or not, can strike a giant creative bonfire. Here's a poem I wrote in half an hour, just before a potluck dinner party with a friend who was dying of cancer. It's called Hope Salad. She waits for a telegraph from spring, pushes aside the wadding, finds tiny leaves infused with the hardship of winter, plucks one leaf at a time. Only the willing are chosen. She finds hope in the salad, omens in the earth. This is what hope tastes like to her: sweet, generous, green. These words instantly transport me back to the moment of tasting spinach that had overwintered in my garden, its leaves like meat. In contrast with the sorrow I was feeling, the thrill of the early spring bounty left me ecstatic. The poem presented itself in just a few minutes, completely whole, as if I had plucked it out of the ground, like the salad I was composing. Can creative works be rushed? I place a piece of fabric, or 3 or 10, and consider whether those fragments take me toward or away from my aim for the piece. The time between decisions is often fruitful and filled with grace, but sometimes the empirical process doesn't need much time. On the days when my decision-making cycle collapses down on the process, the piece can come together in a more intuitive way. On other days, a molasses-like substance coats every surface in the studio, including my hands and my brain. I've tried to discover what constitutes the difference between grace days and molasses days. When everything comes easily, I think I know the secret. Other times, I feel I've lost my way entirely. 1 million media years ago, there was the Time to Make the Donuts commercial. You guys, you're way too young to know this. A chubby, mustachioed man arose from his bed in the dark early morning to bake so he would have the freshest donuts to offer his customers. His daily work was ordinary, but out of that routine supposedly arose the very best donuts. Accolades like the Viola Awards are lovely affirmations from our community, but the real substance of our lives resides in the work we do, whether we bake donuts or write sonnets. The humility that engenders everyday work carries us along towards tangible results, a well-tended garden or a stack of clean laundry, and simultaneously serves to buoy up our creative process. Now, back to work.